I've come back to coach today for some more testing. This time, a lactate test to understand precisely my heart rate zones. I also signed up for their one-on-one coaching with Ben. I've got 17 weeks until the Paris Marathon, and I'll share more details about that in another video. Let's get into it. Hi, Jim.
How are we doing?
Awesome. I am so excited to be back here today for some lactate testing.
Welcome back.
So it was only 6 weeks ago that I was doing some metabolic testing with you.
Was it 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Wow. So how did it go?
Amazing. I took your advice. So carb cycling with the diet. I had no chocolate, sweets, biscuits, cakes for 4 weeks, which is pretty unheard of for me and my poor sweet tooth. I did more aerobic training. So I was doing 2 long runs a week, keeping the heart rate below 148, which was that crossover point where I was burning more carbs than fat. That was tough. During training, I really struggled.
Physically or mentally?
Mentally, it just found it really boring, frustrating. I felt like I was shuffling. Going from a 5.5 minute pace to a 7 minute pace for a kilometre was just really soul destroying. But I did it and I stuck with it and I had faith it would pay off and it did. So if you remember, my goal for the Cambodia Angkor Wat half marathon was to do it in under 2 hours. The fastest I've ever done it is 2 hours.
Right, okay.
And I absolutely smashed that time.
Okay.
So I did it in 1 hour, 49 minutes.
Damn, okay.
So I smashed my goal by 11 minutes.
Yeah, so when you crossed the finish line, were you shocked by that time or?
Shocked, and I cried.
Oh, you cried as well?
Yeah, there's definitely like a video on YouTube Shorts of me crying at crossing the finish line. I started off really well, was kind of weaving in and out, sprinting kind of at the beginning, weaving in and out of people, and realized I was doing a really good pace, felt really good, just decided to kind of increase my speed, see how I went. And then I realized I was kind of getting around that 5:15 a kilometre mark. And I thought, you know what, I think I might be able to do this in around 1:50. So I just kept it up. The other thing I did was carbs. So I took your advice and started consuming carbs from the start of the race.
Okay,
so
good.
I added carbs in my water. I had jelly babies that I was munching on, and then I started with the gels at around 11K.
Nice.
And actually, I think it was just that combination of the training, the nutrition beforehand, and the fueling strategy during the race that just made me absolutely fly.
You got faster as the race went on?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
perfect.
really
What about
enjoyed
hydration then? Did you do anything with the sodium intake?
Yeah, I did, of course. So I was using my precision salt tab. So I had 1,500 grams the night before.
Okay, yeah.
And 1,000 in my camel pack. I didn't stop for water the whole race. I just used what I had in my camel pack.
How big was it?
A litre.
Oh wow, you made a litre last that long?
Yeah.
So you don't drink that much then?
Not that much.
Wow, I couldn't get away with that. I drink about a litre per hour.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Now we got to plan the next race and the next PB.
Yes, exactly. If you remember, the next race is in 17 weeks. That is the Paris Marathon. And
nice.
Originally my goal was to get a sub 4. I have changed that now.
Okay, why have we changed it?
Because I think I can do better.
Okay.
So a lot better.
How much better are we talking?
I'm going to be really bold and say 3:45.
Okay. So do you know what pace you need to run on? Just out of curiosity, 'cause I always ask this. 5:20 pace.
Yeah.
Without stopping, you have to run at least 5:20 pace.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be tough. I had a chat with Ben about that. He was saying it's possible.
Okay. Good.
But let's see.
So the cool thing about what we're about to do, which is the lactate test, is you will be provided with pace training zones.
Yeah.
And those pace zones will indicate to me just how realistic that is. At least I know that we're not about to race, but it'd be interesting to see how far off 5:20 is as far as like a realistic marathon pace for you.
Yeah.
Just if you're curious, and then that way you can have a better expectation of, within the time frame, what you can do. So
let's
see. That's why one thing I like about this test is you can get not only heart rate zones, but pace zones.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. So let's go back to the beginning. And first of all, can you tell me what is lactate and how does our body produce it and use it?
Lactate is the byproduct of glycolysis. Now, it's commonly misconstrued to be something to do with milk and dairy, so I have to always address that, but no, it's not. So glycolysis is basically the process of where your body breaks down carbohydrates for energy. Now, lactate buildup in the bloodstream accumulates mainly through increase in stress. So the harder we work, the more reliant we are on carbohydrate for energy, and due to the fact that lactate is a byproduct of that, The harder you work, the more lactate you produce. And so if lactate builds up in the bloodstream more than you're flushing out of your system, this is what causes the pH and the acidity in your blood to basically drop, therefore forcing your muscles not to be able to contract properly, and it affects your performance and your outcome, right? If we can improve on your ability to flush lactate out of your system, it's going to allow you to operate at a faster, sustainable speed, which is everyone's goal when it comes to running a marathon.
What is the purpose of lactate testing?
So the main purpose for this test is to help people establish where they hit their lactate threshold. At the same time, we can still establish also the other threshold, which is known as your aerobic threshold. But by knowing where these two data points happen, we can work backwards to establish accurate heart rate zones and pace zones, so that when you go about training, you optimize all the time you're willing to commit. And so whether you're, a couch to 5K person and you lack all kind of fitness, or if you're an advanced sort of world marathon major runner, you'll benefit from this test.
What is the protocol for today's test?
The protocol is simple. So we're going to start by getting a baseline reading of your lactate and heart rate. I'm going to put a heart rate monitor on your left bicep to track your heart rate. And for the lactate, it's going to require me to give you a small finger prick. Okay. Now don't worry, aim to be a nice guy and doing this only the once today. If you're doing literature studies with lactate testing, they do advocate that you do a prick every time you take a reading, but honestly that's wildly unnecessary. As long as I properly wipe the site and get a reading, it's going to be okay. But the process is going to be basically an incremental step test. Each step or stage is about 3 minutes long, followed by a minute of rest, with the idea that the start speed is relatively comfortable, and as we repeat that process, we go up in 1 kilometer increments, so that by the 4th to 6th, the speed will have gone up enough to encourage your body to produce more lactate than you can clear and cross lactate threshold. Now, that's universally accepted to be 4 millimoles within the bloodstream of lactate. So once we've surpassed that number by a decent margin and the increments are at least a 1 millimole increment, then we know we've got what we needed. My hope is that if we get the start speed right, we only need you on the treadmill for 5 or 6 stages at most.
How best can we prepare for the test?
The pre-test requirements for this is always to be well rested. Now that can be defined as within 24 hours of the test being conducted, you do no form of exercise. That's usually kind of rule 1. But if you're flying or if you're you're doing anything that may affect the body, we usually encourage us not to test too close to that, right? No exercise the day before. Just give your body a well-rested fighting chance. It's hard to control, of course, because everyone has their own life, but yeah, there are things within our control that we can avoid, which is obviously stressing the body out physically. No exercise the day before is just a good staple. Get as much sleep as you can, and then hydration can play a bit of a role. We do encourage people to just optimize that prior, get a bit of electrolytes in, just to maximize blood volume, because if you're dehydrated, that can or has been known to affect lactate slightly. Other than that, that's pretty much it.
I'm a little bit tired. I am probably not as hydrated as I would normally be, and it has been 24 hours since I trained.
Yeah, that's okay.
So.
One more point to mention, of course, is racing, because training is obviously a staple, but we want to avoid testing you too close to a race if it's post-race. An ideal time to test actually is pre-race, within a week of the race itself. So basically when you taper, because theoretically your body should freshen up in that week or 2 weeks, depending on how long your taper is, to the point where we should get the most accurate data in relation to all that hard work you've just put in. Whereas let's say a week post-race, there's a high chance, certainly if it's a marathon or anything longer, your body's still recovering a little bit. We encourage not to really test within a week or even 2 weeks sometimes for people, just to be safe. But like I say, everyone recovers differently. We leave it up to the individual ultimately if they're willing to come in, because time constraints. But we do want to but in an ideal world, it's right at the start of training, so you've got your zones and you're good to go, or right at the end when you're about to go into a race, and then you can get an update on where you're at.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, let's do it. To start, we did a quick warm-up walking on the treadmill and had a bit of a chat about trainers and coached athlete success in the past week's Valencia and Singapore marathons. Then it came time to do the first lactate test.
Okay.
God, that's high, isn't it?
It's a little on the high side, but we're going to continue anyway, because if we warm up, it can lower.
The pre-test lactate result was 1.7 mils. The first 3-minute run was a nice and easy 8 kilometers an hour. I hopped off for a quick test and a 1-minute rest. The second lactate test result was 1.3 mils. The lactate was coming down. The second run was another easy one at 9 kilometers an hour. The next lactate test came down even further to 1 mils. The third 3-minute run jumped up to 10 kilometers an hour. The next lactate test results started to come back up again to 1.3 mils. The fourth 3-minute run was 11 kilometers an hour, still okay, but getting a little bit harder. The next lactate test result was 1.7 mils. The fifth 3-minute run was 12 kilometers an hour. I was starting to feel it a little bit now. The lactate test now jumped up to 3.1 mils. The final 3-minute run was 13 kilometers an hour, and this was actually quite tough for me. The final lactate test result was over 4 mils, hitting my lactate threshold.
Test complete. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good.
Tired?
Good. A bit tired. I'm not used to training in the afternoon, so I am very much a 5 a.m. girl. So it was, yeah, a bit headachy, a bit dehydrated, but overall, yeah, it was good.
Well, the good news is, as far as first tests go, this is pretty solid. Yay. So what we've got in front of us here is just the standard report that we generate for each person when they do a test with us. As you can see right at the top, we have the lactate graph. Below, which I'm not showing you yet because I want to keep you in suspense, is your training zones and a description of what we see. But yeah, this on the surface may look a little complicated, but I'll break it down for you in a second. Sound good?
Awesome. Yeah, let's do it.
What you can see here along the bottom axis is the speed. So as you know, you started at 8, then we went to 9, 10, 11, 12, and we finished actually at 13 kilometers an hour. So like I said earlier, we normally do 4 to 6 stages, and turns out actually we underestimated your fitness. And 8 was actually too slow for you, because as you can see, your lactate readings were a little high at the start, but then they dropped. Which is common, you know, when people warm up and they start off at a very comfortable speed, it's expected to see the lactate lower a little. Bottom axis here, that's indicating the speeds that we did. Now, if we come up from that to these red dots and this blue curve, this is your lactate profiling from start to end. So it's as simple as, for example, at 9 kilometers an hour, if I come up to the red dot and come across this way, that tells me based on the axis what your lactate was. So as you can see, for 8, 9, 10, and 11, they were pretty much all the same. They really didn't budge much. In fact, there's a lot of symmetry. We went from 1.3 to 1, then 1.3, and then 1.7. Now the green dots, if we come up even further, this is your heart rate data. So it's as simple as just, for example, once again at 9, if I come up to the green dot, come all the way across to this axis, that's what your heart rate was saying. But what's more important, because this is expected to be linear, is actually more this and how it looks. What's great about your result, certainly for a marathon runner, is that you can clear lactate pretty well. Now I know this because despite the speed going up, your lactate readings didn't budge for a good 4 stages. Ideally, for first time testers, if I can get that for the first 3, I'm happy. But we actually got it for the first 4. So it turns out, like I mentioned before, you actually are fitter than you actually think you are. We crossed 2 millimoles, which is accepted to be your aerobic threshold, as you can see here, at this point of the curve, which is illustrated at the top here. So 2 millimoles, you were at 164 beats per minute, and the speed was at 11.19 kilometers an hour. So we need to know this, because this is the point where you can maximize lactate clearance. So you're clearing just as much as you produce, so therefore sustainable, and you're able to maximize your output, okay? When you go beyond this point, as you can see, for 12 and 13, these readings definitely jumped respectively, right? To the point where at 12 kilometers an hour, we went up to 3 millimoles. And then by 13, we had therefore crossed that 4 millimole mark, which as you can see, which is lactate threshold, happened at 12.59 kilometers per hour. And if I come up to the heart rate line, come across, 174 beats per minute. So it was these 2 data points that are most important to us, because we use this to work backwards to establish your training zones. Sound good? Yeah, cool. Any questions about this so far?
My main question, and we might get onto this later, is like, can I move that lactate clearance? Okay.
In order to make that happen, we need to apply training zones. So that's a good segue into what you are about to read. So let's start with heart rate zones. Easy is now established to be, and this is zone 1 only, easy is 147 beats per minute and below. Steady brings you all the way up to 162. We talked earlier about your crossover point being actually around the 145 mark.
Yeah.
That's actually just base of zone 2. Now we can basically establish that if you keep your heart rate at and below 162, you can clear just as much lactate as you produce.
Yeah.
Make sense? And once again, if I consider 2 millimole, 164, 162, the formula is almost bang on, okay? If we keep our heart rate at this point and below, we are maximizing lactate clearance. If you let your heart rate creep beyond this point, 163 to 173 is considered moderately hard, or zone 3. Zone 4 is 174, lactate threshold, and above, anything above 179, we're talking very hard levels of effort. Okay, so you happy to see this?
Yeah, I am, because it means that I think I ran the marathon last year at 156.
Oh, interesting, okay.
Yeah, the Singapore marathon a year ago, 156.
Okay. Keep in mind, when it comes to talking about heart rate with racing though, it's very unreliable, let's say, due to the emotion of the day. Like adrenaline is the biggest factor that plays with your heart rate and can skew that reflection. In fact, it's most common for people to post-race look at their heart rate and just see zone 5.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, how's that even possible? Like, surely that's not sustainable. But in retrospect, well, a couple reasons. Usually people's zones just aren't set up right. But actually the second reason is because the emotion and the adrenaline has spiked your heart rate and it's sat much higher than it normally would. It doesn't mean you're under that amount of physical stress, but your parasympathetic nervous system is firing, you know, that fight and flight. And so it's elevated what it should actually look like for that output that you probably raced at. So don't prioritize heart rate to measure your output in a race. Actually look more at pace to have a more measured approach and make sure you're executing the race properly. Okay. Speaking of pace, if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see your pace zones. An easy pace for you is considered 6:07. Sound right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All the way up to 5:08 is considered steady. Are you shaking your head?
Like, wow, okay, that's
fast.
Yeah.
A little faster than you're expecting.
But yeah, it doesn't always feel sustainable. But that could also be my fueling.
Interesting. Well, as far as it stands now, that's basically the aerobic threshold pace. So if you're running a very aggressive marathon, that's kind of, and once again, it depends on a few things, but that would be more or less your upper limit, assuming the stars align and fueling doesn't play a role, dehydration, muscular fatigue, and so on. At least as far as your fitness is concerned, it's pretty solid.
So me running the half marathon on last Sunday at 5:12 was actually in a steady. You were at the high end of steady, like you're talking 4 seconds off. If we're talking half marathon though, I would like to think you probably had the capacity to go out of zone 2 into zone 3, slightly more towards the low to mid end of zone 3, if we're really giving it everything we've got. I think I probably could have gone a little bit.
Yeah, but here's the thing, you have no frame of reference up until now.
No.
So don't sell yourself short, like it's understandable, and it's actually good that you were a little conservative because it allowed you to probably run a good race.
Yeah.
And keep in mind too, yes, these pace zones are determined in a controlled environment. If you jump outside in Singapore, like you will find that it's going to be slightly less accommodating. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
All right. But when it comes to application of pace zones, we're looking at mainly your speed runs and tempo runs, okay? Because, you know, in order for you to train your anaerobic system properly, we need that polarization. And if we looked at heart rate, for instance, instead, there's always going to be a delay and lag. Like you can't expect your heart rate, if I come back up, for example, to go from hard, which is 174 to 179. Let's say you went to the track and did a 1 minute hard, 1 minute easy, repeats. You can't expect it to bounce back and forth fast enough. So if you obviously look at pace instead and look at your watch, you speed up, it will reflect it. You slow down, it will reflect it. So you just make sure that you put your body under just the right amount of stress because it's very easy to overcook things as well. So when you go to a track environment, you know, everyone's got the same mentality and it's good in some ways because it's motivational, but it's very easy to go too hard and therefore put your body under not the correct amount of stress. Because that's the idea. We just need to stress your body to a certain degree to yield a certain kind of adaptation. I probably mentioned this last time I saw you.
Yeah.
I'm a broken record, I know, but it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is how we're able to measure that. With your pace zones for your speed work and tempo work, and with your heart rate zones for the aerobic work, what this should do is all around train you to become more conditioned. And as far as what we need most work on, you have a good aerobic fitness. It's well established due to the fact that you can clear lactate very well for a good 4 stages. But from your aerobic threshold and above, how much your lactate accumulated, I think there's work that we could improve on. So improving your ability to tolerate lactate will come through that proper speed work, through proper strength training and adding hills into your training, okay?
Yeah.
Sound good?
Yep.
Yeah, you had a really good first test. I'm certainly happy as your sports scientist you can consider. So yeah, I'm very excited to see actually give it 4 to 5 months, because that's, by the way, the recommended time before retesting, because these changes are physiological, they take time. Yeah. But I'll be very curious to see how we can build on this, but we're already off to a good start. Your training frequency is going to be important here, and how you apply the stress. That's where Ben's going to come into play. He's going to make sure you keep a lid on things and you don't get out of control. Yeah. But with Paris coming up, it's a marathon. We need to be a lactate clearing machine. A good 70 to 80% of your time will still be aerobic, which is, once again, now 147 to 162 with a good 20% of improving that lactate tolerance, because that fatigue is going to kick in around the 30 to 42K mark. It's almost inevitable. Killed me last time. So the last thing we want is for that to aggressively kick in and then force your pace to slow immediately. But if we can improve that lactate tolerance, which is expected to happen at that point, you won't see your pace be as affected. Okay? Yeah. And I found that the strength training in particular that I've done with our athletes, it really helps with that. It's not just mental, but it's also that physical element of allowing them to persevere and just maintain that desired race pace, Yeah. What was the race pace you wanted to run?
Well, I think after doing the half marathon in 1:49, I was thinking, is it going to be possible for me to do a marathon in 3:45?
Okay, and what pace does that mean required?
5:20.
You're not far off, Considering that 5:20 puts you like I say, it's higher of the zone 2 right now. It's within your zone 2, which is most important actually. So if we can just pull this aerobic threshold pace up, and what I mean by up, I mean make it faster and get it into the 4-minute realm, that 5:20 becomes more and more realistic. So as far as starting point,
it's not impossible.
It's definitely not impossible.
It's not an impossible goal.
And Paris, if I'm not mistaken, because we have had a few athletes run it, it's a relatively cold race. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Much kinder than here, right? So that's definitely in your favor. If we can optimize your training in this humid climate, and then obviously you're not too susceptible to the cold, I like to think you're going to see a good increase in speed just due to that fact. So that's in your favor. And there's a couple other things that we need to tweak when it comes to footwear maybe, just to add to the equation. Yeah. But nice, that makes me excited now. Yeah. Now that there's definitely possibility. We've got how many months now?
17 weeks, so 4 months.
Awesome, game on.
Yeah, and I'm halfway there, right? So
there you go.
Yay! Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to training with Ben, and yeah, I've got my training plan. I'm ready to go.
Let's do it.
I hope you found this video helpful. I'll link down to Coached below, and you can watch the metabolic test that we did here. Please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to follow the journey of me training for the Paris Marathon. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.